just want to welcome everybody to tonight's event, Sweet City, A History of Candy Manufacturing in Somerville, Cambridge, and Boston. This event is sponsored by us, the Somerville Museum, and co-sponsored by Historic Somerville. Tonight's talk is led by Jeremy Spindler from Spindler Confections and is part of the programming for our current exhibition, Bittersweet, and this Chocolate Stories Salon series. So while this event is free and open to all, donations are always welcome that help support these types of future programs. To learn more about the museum, how to donate, or become a member, you can follow the link in the chat, which I'm going to put in the chat right now. To everybody. Great. And so we ask that everybody please remain on mute during the talk. There will be an opportunity for discussion at the end. And just a reminder that this event will be recorded and posted on our website and our social media pages. So now I'd like to introduce Santiago Montoya, also Jose Falcone, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. Santiago will give a brief overview of the Bittersweet exhibition as an artist and curator for the project, and also give you an overview of the project itself before we hand it over to Jeremy. So Santiago.
Thanks, Alison. Well, first of all, thanks for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have everybody here getting together around something that we all crave on so much, of course, chocolate. It's been a fascinating experience working together with everybody at Somerville, at the Somerville Museum. Basically, with Jose Falcone, who's a dear friend, an art critic, curator, myself, an artist, we've been together working the history of commodities in America since its discovery, you know, as usually we refer to that event. And particularly with chocolate, I did a number of sculptures to illustrate somehow the history of Colombia, which is my native country. And through the years, after having done this first chocolatery in Colombia, we came to meet some dear friends in Boston, you know, like David Gus, who had a conversation with Jose, and the dream of having a chocolatery taking place in Somerville, at the Somerville Museum, took place. So it's pretty obvious why, because of course chocolate has a big history in Somerville and the greater Boston area, and that's why Jeremy is going to be, you know, taking us through a historical trip and diving into why Somerville has such a relevant place in history, not only in the US, but I would say in the world, and particularly since the discovery of America. What happens there is pretty fascinating.
Great, thank you so much. So Jeremy Spindler owns Spindler Confection, where he produces handmade chocolates and candies. The business began in 2011 out of his home in Somerville before moving to its current location in North Cambridge in 2015. Since 2012, he, along with his husband and co-owner, Jeffrey Myers, has curated a collection of over 300 pieces of ephemera linked to the candy industry of the Boston metro area, including photos, candy boxes, advertisements, news articles, catalogs, and equipment, many of which are on display in their whimsical little shop. So if you haven't visited it recently, we highly recommend it. I'm going to turn this over to Jeremy, and thank you all very much.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Really excited to be able to do this. I don't get to talk about candy and candy history all that much. So thanks to the museum and for letting me kind of piggyback on this exhibit. Gonna jump right in because there's a lot of stuff, a lot of really fun stuff that I want to show you. A lot of amazing companies were here. Pretty much none of them are here anymore. Quick overview of how the presentation will unfold. We are first going to dive right into the heyday of candy production in Cambridge, Boston, and the whole metro area. So this is roughly 1930 to about 1970, really hitting a peak in the late 50s, early 60s. We will then take it back a couple centuries and quickly look at some of the factors that enabled and sort of nourished this industry to grow here. And then we'll quickly look at the various things that led to the decline of the industry and why when you walk around Boston and Cambridge today, unless you know the history and you kind of know what to look for, you would have no idea that this industry existed here. I lived here for probably 6 or 7 years, having no clue that all of these companies used to exist here, making all this candy and chocolate and all kinds of stuff. So with that, we're going to jump in. I'm going to just toggle over to the presentation here. Give me one sec. All right. So, Sweet City, history of candy manufacturing in the area here. So the sweetest years, that peak that happened in the late 50s, early 60s. If you grew up here, you might know this, but the Boston metro area at one time was home to over about 140 factories, give or take. It fluctuated, some factories closed, new ones opened, but at its peak, there were about 140 factories producing candy. These were not little mom and pop kind of shops like I have. These were often multi-story factories producing many, many, many thousands of pounds of candy a year. These are a few of the candies that came out of the Boston area, as well as some of the companies. So NECCO, of course, is probably the most famous one that likely everybody knows about. Sadly, they don't exist anymore, but you can still get some of their products. This is just a handful, right? There were many, many, many more things. By the numbers, by sales numbers, these are according to, this is according to the New England Manufacturing Confectioners Association. We have a booklet that they printed in the 60s. So to give you an idea of how much was being produced here, in 1899, the Boston metro area, along with New England as a whole, but really centered very much in Boston and Cambridge, was producing about $5.8 million worth of product, or $196 million in today's money. 1913, almost quadrupled, about 20 million in sales annually, or 550 million today. 1926, more than doubled again, about 50 million in sales, or 760 million today. Those numbers, I want to point out, 500 or 760 million is obviously not more than double 550 million. Deflation, inflation, there's all kinds of things that play into conversion calculators. So that's why it seems like there's a discrepancy there. And then by 1965, which essentially was the peak, $188 million worth of product being produced out of the metro area, which is about $1.6 billion in today's money. That might not seem like a lot because we have multi-billion-dollar tech companies in Cambridge now, but that is their valuations often. So their stock, their assets, all their holdings, the whole 9 yards. We are just talking about raw sales numbers of how much candy was being sold. In 1965, they produced about 370 million pounds of products. And the largest of these factories, Page and Shaw, NECCO, perhaps, Schrafft's, they were in some cases able to produce up to 300,000 pounds, 300,000 pounds of candy per day, or about 90,000 pounds a year at full capacity, right? They were not operating at full capacity all the time. Going into the holiday season, most likely they were. Here's a map of Cambridge, and that area where the arrow is pointing to was known for many decades as Confectioners Row right here. It's about a 0.7 mile stretch of Main Street, pretty much the entirety of Main Street, from Central Square to Kendall Square in Cambridge. It was the vicinity on top of that, though. Many were right on Main Street, but they did extend out along Mass Ave. NECCO was on Mass Ave, for example. They extended back into the neighborhoods a little bit here as well. A few sprinkled throughout, wards maybe 3 and 5. Not really anything going on in this portion, though. They were very much focused right here near the river. We have stumbled upon this Cambridge business directory from 1953 to 1954. And in these listings, this will give you a snapshot of what Cambridge might have been like at that time, or was like at that time. There were 38 manufacturers of candy in Cambridge in 1953. There were an additional 8 wholesalers. So they weren't making product, but they were purchasing product from other companies and distributing it and shipping it. I find this really interesting. There were 37 chocolate shops and ice cream parlors in Cambridge during that time. That's a lot. Today, we have 1 manufacturer in Cambridge and 8 shops. The manufacturer is where they're producing Junior Mints on Main Street. It's the last one from that era. To give some perspective, we did lose all of those little chocolate shops and parlors, but they've been replaced largely with coffee shops. I think we had a shift in culture. Used to, you would hang out at the soda fountain, you know, the ice cream parlor, that kind of thing. Nowadays, we hang out at coffee shops. So we did lose something, but we gained something new. Obviously, I think we all love our little coffee shops. 16 of those 33 are Dunkin' Donuts. And here we've got a ward map from 1930. A lot of really great information in these old maps. Jeff and I are both semi-collectors of ward maps. We have quite a few. This is from 1930. We don't have one from the 50s or 60s. They're not in public domain yet, and we just have not been able to find one on the private market. But you can see there are already, this is heading into the peak, right? Another 30 years or so. But lots of companies clustered here together on Main Street. So we've got C.A. Briggs here in this building, Greylock Confectionery, Daggett's in this building. This was a big company. Durant was also another big company. And then another neighbor of theirs, Page and Shaw, was one of the biggest. They ended up becoming one of the biggest in the world, actually. They had 3 buildings, this one here, and then this was actually their box factory. They made their own packaging. They've also got maybe some storage back here as well. This over here is just a chocolate shop. This was not a factory. On the other end of Main Street, heading towards Central Square, we have another cluster. Lots of wholesalers had their offices and possibly some warehouses in this area. These are the big ones at this time, H.D. Foss and the Potter Confectionery. These are both very big buildings. We'll see a couple pictures of these here in a moment. Another one tucked here in the neighborhood, Keswick Candy Company back here. Here is another one, another candy shop, Fannie Farmer over on the east side. And an interesting thing to note is there was also the Cambridge Paper Box Company up here. I don't know if they supplied the chocolate shops with packaging, but nonetheless, it's kind of interesting that you do have a packaging company right there. I'm assuming it's a packaging company, I should say, right there where all these consumer product manufacturers are located. Now we're going to start looking at some of the actual factories. This is an old one. So this one was in operation from 1887 till about 1917. That's the last listing that I found for it, but we have a gap. We go from like 1917, I think, to like 1925. So I don't know what happened in those intermittent years. This was a fairly small operation, but they did produce their own chocolates and candies. Don't know if they occupied the whole building. It may have just been the first floor, but I really love this picture. I love these old sort of artist engravings or prints here. And they were across from Cambridge Sports School near Inman Square. Now we're getting into the industrial sizes. Boston Confectionery Company, 1814 to 822 Main Street. So they were on Confectioners Row. You can see here on the word map. So heading right over here is Lafayette Square and Central Square. Here is their company. They own this entire little parcel. And keep this in mind because this is going to turn into 2 different companies here in just a moment. This is the George Close building at 245 Broadway. This is approximately 1896 for the picture. That's when they opened their store here. Got the nice horse-drawn carriages in the front and maybe a little bit of a farmhouse next door. I doubt it was an actual farm, of course. But this same view, we have a picture of a few years later. And this is that same parcel of land in 1917. They underwent a very major expansion. They tore down the building. I don't know if they shuttered for that time period, but this is very different than this, right? We go from a 4-story, relatively small factory to a 6-story, pretty huge factory. And they did occupy this whole building, from what I understand. They took over that little farmhouse next door as well. The H.D. Foss Company, also on Main Street. And this is that building today. This is where they make all of the junior mints in the world. I mentioned that earlier. Pretty sure this is the same building. If you look at just the style of the building, the windows, the three windows together there, it looks very, very much like the same building. And these were in the exact same location. Now we're going to move into Page and Shaw, and we're going to talk about them for a little bit because they were a major, major player up until about 1960. So you see a postcard here, a little artist rendition of their factory, which opened in 1911. This is on Ames Street, which is right off of Main Street. You can see the Salt and Pepper Bridge in the back, Charles River and Boston across the river there. A few of their boxes that we have in our collection on the left going to talk about this more later, but notice the what I see is a lot of artistry and very beautiful design that goes into these boxes. Think of the boxes that you see today for a lot of candies. Even in our little shop, our boxes, like they had teams of artists designing these things. And the only connecting factor between these are their logo. That's really it. Everything else about the box, the design, the colors, the patterns, everything are different. Notice that it does say New York, Boston, and Montreal. They grew to be a very big company with multiple factories, as we're going to see here in 1 second. This will give you an idea of what they were producing at Page and Shaw. I am particularly curious to know what a honey blow is. Never heard of that kind of a candy before, but it sounds like it would be fun to eat, if not tasty at least. Peppermints, maple walnuts, orange delights, vanities, pineapple cordials. Never had a pineapple cordial, a raisin cluster, all kinds of stuff. They did hard candy as well, amongst many other things. A couple of cute advertisements. If you think that being marketed to by celebrities is a new thing, you're very wrong. This was 1963 or 64, and you have Bob Hope trying to sell you chocolates for the holiday season. All right, more boxes on the left. You get an idea of how much they changed their boxes and really put a lot of clever design into these. This is one season, and they have 3 radically different boxes. This one here, they don't even have that logo icon. They're the sort of main trademark of theirs. It's just Page and Shaw. That's it. Very simple. And here is an actual photo of their building. So this is when they expanded. You can compare it to the building on the right. Obviously, this was enhanced a little bit. Seems a little more whimsical than the actual building. But here on the right, candy factory. This building on the left, it's apparently their chocolate factory. And in the back here is where they have their box factory. And we're going to see a picture of inside the box factory here in a sec. Now we're going to go into the factory. These pictures, believe it or not, are from 1924. I still have a hard time believing that because of the equipment that you're about to see. It looks like something that you would expect in the 50s or the 60s. So pretty simple one here. A bunch of workers just dipping chocolates. More dipping bonbons, a little bit better view of what they're doing. This seems what I expected in the 20s. A lot of hand labor, a lot of time put into these. But now you're seeing this was a factory, right? We're getting into really into the industrial age. Cocoa mills, these, what little bit I know about chocolate making, these would have been used to grind up the cacao beans. So they were a bean to bar producer. They were producing their own chocolate, using that chocolate to make candies, making their own boxes, had their own artist on staff to design the boxes. They had printers to print the boxes. They packed the boxes. They were ground up, a lot of vertical integration here. I don't know what these did. They obviously rolled, but I don't know what. Mixer, either used to mix candy, possibly to mix chocolate, but I think this was probably for some sort of sugar-based as opposed to chocolate-based product. Conchs, or finishing machines, as they call them. These are typically used for the final stages of making chocolate. This is what turns chocolate from, if you know Taza chocolate, that sort of really nice grainy texture that Taza has, that's their trademark. If you go through the conching process, that will further refine it and make it very smooth and creamy. Chocolate presses, I am pretty sure these are what they used to separate cocoa mass from cocoa butter. Chocolate will yield 2 products. The cocoa mass is the dark part, the bitter chocolatey part of chocolate, and cocoa butter is the fat of chocolate. It's typically sort of a creamy off-white color. And here is them in the box factory. We found this sign rather humorous. This is, I believe, also from that 1924 booklet. It was a different time, different society, different culture. They explicitly wanted girls, right? This was their entire one ad. I don't think there was any more information with this. Just girls wanted Page and Shaw. As you notice in the pictures, all of the chocolate work, the dipping, probably a lot of the packaging was done by women, pretty much exclusively. And anytime you saw a piece of machinery in the picture, there was always a man there. Not saying that's good or bad, just a different time, a little glimpse into how things had changed in the country. I'm gonna go through a quick timeline of the rise and fall of Page and Shaw, and this will start to give you some more inkling of what happened to so many of these companies over time. They have a pretty fascinating history. They started in 1888, small shop in Boston. By 1911, that is when they opened their Ames Street factory that you just saw. 1920, a gentleman named Otis Emerson acquires control. I don't know how. I don't know if he was hired or if he bought all the shares up and got majority ownership, but somehow he comes into the picture and he goes on a massive expansion with the company. And over 4 years, 1924, their sales peak. They have factories in London, Paris, Montreal, New York. I think they have some on the West Coast. They have 35 stores throughout the world as well. A really, really big company. 1929, heading into the stock crash, right? So this really hurts the company significantly. In addition to the stock crash, the federal government discovers that Otis Emerson, along with 2 stockbrokers, have been committing fraud. And they were issuing stock at $2 a share, legitimate stock at $2 a share. They were then cooking the books and pocketing the money. Because of this, the company went bankrupt. They were found guilty. Don't know if they were sent to prison, but they were found guilty. And in 1931, the Daggett Company, which was literally their next door neighbor, purchases Page and Shaw, and they continue making Page and Shaw candies under the ownership of Daggett. Fast forward 30 years and NECCO purchases Daggett, and they decide to discontinue the Page and Shaw line. So you will never see Page and Shaw candies again after 1960. And then fast forward to 2018, very, very, very sadly, NECCO shuts down all of its operations and sells off its intellectual property. You're going to see this happening a lot, a whole lot. You can think of NECCO as evil because of that, or you can think of them as a bit of a savior, because they did save a lot of these companies from going into oblivion much sooner than they eventually did. So I think it's better that they bought them up as opposed to just letting them disappear altogether. And this is a piece of Page and Shaw stock that Jeff and I own. We are proud owners of a defunct company. And notice the date of issue, October 4th, 1929. This is most likely one of those fraudulent stock pieces, or excuse me, one of the stocks that were issued that they then pocketed the money and cooked the books with. 2 weeks later, you have Black Tuesday and the country goes into the Depression. We even have the letter of acknowledgement and the envelope this stock certificate was sent to the owner in. And that's Page and Shaw. Moving on to Squirrel Nut. If you grew up in the area, I guarantee you knew Squirrel Nut brand. This is the building. It is still in existence. It still has the signage on it. You can go see it today. There's a Google satellite view. You can see 10 Boardman Street right there, corner of Boardman and Broadway. And we have Squirrel Brand Park and Squirrel Brand Community Garden there as a little memorial. This building is now residences. I think they're condos, but they kept the signage, and I'm really happy about that. It's sort of a fun little landmark there. Quick timeline of this company. They were founded in 1888. Excuse me. By 1899, they rebrand as a Squirrel Brand Nut Company. 1903, they move into this building in Cambridge, and they stay there pretty miraculously for almost 100 years. In 1999, the company was purchased by a company out in Texas. A short 5 years later, go figure, NECCO purchases them back and they bring the brand back to New England. And then in 2018, they sell off their intellectual property when they shut down. And a company called John B. Sanfilippo & Son now owns Squirrel Brand, and they are producing Squirrel Brand nuts, and you can purchase them online. I don't know where their company is located. I think they are mail order only and they don't have a store. Couple little pieces of ephemera from Squirrel Nut. On the left, that advertisement gives you an idea of what they did. So nut meats, almonds, pecans, peanuts, stuffed dates, peanut butter, nut candies, nut shoes. The Squirrel Nut zipper was a Squirrel Nut product. And that little squirrel was their icon. We actually have a cardboard cutout of this in our collection as well. It's pretty fun. And we're going to go into the Squirrel Brand factory for a moment. I think these pictures are around 1950, 1960, just from the color images and the sort of the fashion of the day. All of these images are courtesy of the Cambridge Historical Society. Don't know what a lot of this equipment is doing, some kind of big mixers, but it's still really neat to see these pictures. Some packaging going on there. I'm going to guess these here are going to be going to a cutter and then into a wrapping machine. Some cooling tables, I assume. And some big kettles, probably cooking some sort of sugar mixture in there. No idea what those are. They look like boilers. And they did their own packaging as well. I don't think they made their packaging, but they of course packaged it all. And some more cooling tables. Look, you get a better sense of how big those kettles are in this picture. It's like some more cooling tables, might be doing some packaging back here. But even as a confectioner and chocolatier, I'm not sure what they're doing in all these pictures. It was quite the operation. And this one I find interesting. This looks like a ground nut paste of some sort. Maybe these are going to be their nut chews, but they're rolling this out, kind of flattening it together the same way you would cookie dough in a form. So it has a nice square, even shape. It's going to cool, and then most likely they're going to cut it into small pieces, of course. Maybe it would have gotten dipped in chocolate. I don't think they did any chocolate work, though. I think they were really just nuts and candy. And just some little nut chews on the left, and a Squirrel brand shipping crate that we have in our museum on the right there. It's amazing that there's still stuff around. You would think it all just would have been thrown away. These are just a few little advertisements. So on the left, the Daggett Company, you can see again how a lot of mergers happened over time. So at this point in 1953, Daggett owns Page and Shaw. They also own Lowney's, and they also own Apollo. They might even own a few other companies as well. Duran's was another company. Don't have a lot of info on them, but you get an idea of what they were producing at that time. They were near Lechmere Square, as you can see. And another one for Squirrel Nut. And then on the right, Welch's was a brand. They were the developers of Junior Mints. That's now owned by the Cambridge Brands Company, operating on Main Street today. So they also did Sugar Daddies and Sugar Babies. I think they acquired those. I don't believe that Sugar Daddies and Sugar Babies were actually developed in Cambridge. All right, so that's our Cambridge segment. We're going to move on and look at a couple companies in Shraps that are very, very much worth exploring. Or a couple companies in Boston, excuse me. Shraps is one of the big ones. They were in Sullivan Square in Charlestown. Their building is still there, and they still have the signage. I believe it has been made a landmark and will not be coming down anytime soon, I hope. They claim to have been the largest candy factory in the world at one time, with 1,600 employees. And they produced a whole slew of things. They had stores up and down the East Coast. They had motor inns, ice cream parlors. They had restaurants. Really, really big company. They did have other factories besides this one in Charlestown as well. Old company, founded in 1861. This factory in Sullivan Square was built in 1928 and continued operating until 1981. Got purchased by the Pet Milk Company. And then eventually Gulf and Western, I don't know who that is, but they were the final owner until they shut down in 1981. So you can see from the New York Times article here. They're citing just people just aren't buying expensive chocolates anymore, and they're not turning a profit. This is also heading into a recession in the early 80s. So sadly, they shut their doors and put about, I think, 800 or 900 people out of business. Just going to give you a little small glimpse into corporate culture of the day. I find these really funny. So we were able to buy a lot of pieces from someone that obviously worked at the company and had these items in their attic or something like that, maybe a grandparent or something, who knows. But they put on a original musical, and this was surprisingly very common during the post-boom era of America. There's a really fantastic documentary called Bathtubs Over Broadway that, if you find this intriguing, I highly, highly recommend. It talks about all of the industrial shows that were produced. Martin Short got his start in those. Florence Henderson got her start in TV and musicals doing them. These were pretty lavish productions. I don't know about this one, but some of them, they were putting several $100,000 with costume designers, composers who their whole careers were writing scores, musical scores for all of these companies. And you only got to see it if you were an employee. That's it. There are some recordings here and there. But this is the program from their 100th anniversary. I don't know if this is from that particular program, but you see obviously some very happy people back here. She doesn't look too thrilled to be holding a ball above her head, but this is probably like their annual banquet or something like that they held. They do have a piano in the front, so this may actually have been that musical. Same thing here. They've got, yep, they have a pit orchestra down there, so I think this is the show. I just noticed that. Giant lollipops in the back, a little comical. They produced magazines, right? And these were written by journalists that they hired, of course. But here is the program inside. All of these people contributed articles to these magazines. They're about 30, 35 pages. They're not small. And another glimpse of how society was starting to change just a little bit. So in 1963, their annual banquet of the Women's Club and the Men's Club. A few years later, 1966, you now just have a social club. So we're starting to see culture change a little bit for, in my opinion, for the better. Now we're going to look at some boxes here. So again, a lot of artistry, very different designs. The only linking factor is you see that Schrafft's logo with the same font. They even changed the color for them. This one in particular, I really like. So this is a tin, red, gold, and black with pretty ornate roses. These are very old. Most of the boxes in these slides that you're going to see are from anywhere from the 1920s to the 1960s, a couple from the 70s. So a lot of the paint has scratched off, they've faded, but they're still in pretty decent condition overall. Just starting to see again the artistry, the ornateness of this box, very 1920s, kind of, to me, a flapper aesthetic to it. Getting a little bit more into probably the 50s or the 60s here with this one in the corner. They also did hard candy, as you can see. We have a little tin up there. Really like this one a lot as well. All right, kind of moving along a little quicker here. A lot of color, I think, is faded on this one. The only markings on this box are on the bottom. Oops, there we go. Simply says Schrafft's, Boston, Massachusetts. That's it. Even though, or that this was prior to when they had to put ingredients on everything, so they could just get away with nothing but their name. Interesting texture on that one, and these do have a texture to them if you're able to feel the box. It's a little blurry, my apology, but very bright and colorful. I think this one is really clever. They're trying to make it look like a cross stitch work, but this is a tin. This is a printed tin. Radically different than all the other boxes we've seen. And this one is one of my favorites. I think this one above all gives you an idea of the artistry and the talent that went into designing a lot of these boxes. Again, think of like the Whitman sampler box that we see today. It's basically stayed the same, I think, for decades. And they probably used this for maybe 1 or 2 seasons, and that's it. If you remove the logo and the 1 pound net weight, you could put a frame around this and arguably possibly put it in a museum. Like I personally think it's really beautiful. We just don't see consumer packaging like this anymore. FH Roberts, they made a Polo chocolates. Remember, they eventually got by Daggett and then by NECCO. So just a subtle variation. These are the exact same boxes. They just changed the color. So sometimes they did take a simple route, of course. This one is ornate to the gaudy point a little bit. I kind of love to hate this one. It's a little ugly, but also I appreciate the aesthetic of it as well. Little fun symphony chocolates. I don't know if this was a specific selection they included in there or a particular line. And just from a shipping crate. This is one of my favorites, candy covered. I've had so many people come into the shop and be like, I remember that box. I used to get that when I was a kid. So this is a pretty prominent brand, made originally by Lovell and Covell. Eventually they get purchased by NECCO as well. Good old NECCO, just kind of taking them all out. Redesign of the candy cover. They also did a talisman line. They went through a bit of a purple phase. And this one I think is kind of humorous as well. You know, radically different than all the other ones. A little bit of a pirate theme, kind of colorful. Pretty sure this was a chocolate box, but we don't know what was in it. And last section of this part, we're going to very quickly look at some of the confectioneries in Somerville. There were not very many. We basically know of 2. There were Uncle John's Maple Kisses, or the New England Maple Syrup Company. This does say Winter Hill, Boston, but we are not aware of, nor could we find a Winter Hill in Boston. So we think just for recognition of the city, they put Winter Hill, Boston, but we're pretty sure this was in Somerville. Not 100% positive, but that's just what we've been able to deduce. This we have in our collection, quite humorous. Reminds me of the KFC Colonel Sanders. And then the bigger one in Somerville was Kemp's. Not many photos exist of this place, but this was their building over on Walnut Street. They additionally had 2 other buildings. This one is still standing here. And over in the corner, you see this little stone. That is what is in the picture on the left-hand corner, that little K. Sadly, it's just sitting there, exposed to the elements and potential, vandalism and whatnot. I kind of want to go take it and try and save it, but obviously that would be theft, so I will not do that. They were largely a nut company, but they did also do chocolates as well. Here are a few boxes we have of their products. So obviously these are assorted chocolate boxes. We also have salted nuts with the 10 in the bottom there. I don't really know why they have this on the box. This doesn't look anything like their company, but they're trying to get sort of a nice, farmy homestead kind of feel to their products. And of course, we can't talk about Somerville without talking about fluff. There was never a fluff factory in Somerville, but Somerville was invented. Fluff was invented in Somerville. So got to mention it there. It was invented by Archibald Query. After a year, it was sold to the Durkee Mower Company, and it's been produced in Lynn ever since. All right, I am aware of the time. I'm going to try and move a little quicker through the origins here. So there are many reasons why this industry sprouted up. Puritans came over from England. They had a sweet tooth already, just from the culture of England and the sweets they had at the day. Boston was a port city, so lots of goods coming in. Cold weather, this is actually very important. You could not make chocolate and candy anywhere in the South. The further north you were, the better. They did not have air conditioning in the 1800s, right? So they were able to produce chocolate and candy here for 10 months out of the year. Really key one here, 1764, the very first chocolate mill in the country, arguably on the continent of North America, opens down in Dorchester. 1834, we get our first sugar refinery in the country located in East Boston. 1847, the very first candy making machine on the planet was invented in Boston. It's a little hand crank machine you'll see in a moment. 1847, that same person develops founds Chase and Company. This is the very first candy company in the country. We had chocolate companies already, but not candy companies. 1867, we have another refinery that opens. The Revere Sugar Refinery opens in Cambridge. And of course, economies of scale. The more companies you have clustered together, the more efficient everything is, the cheaper everything is, and it just works better. So you see this across the country with all kinds of different industries. And in 1878, to give you an idea, the Boston Business Directory that we have lists 39 manufacturers in Boston, 2 chocolate manufacturers in Boston, and an additional 80 confectionery shops. So again, that culture of the sort of the corner chocolate shop, very prominent. Great moments in chocolate. This is where the first chocolate mill was, down in Dorchester. Founded by a man named John Hannon, along with a acquaintance of his, James Baker. Baker funds Hannon to produce chocolate at the first chocolate mill. 1779, he disappears at sea on a trip to get some more cocoa. His wife sells the company to Dr. Baker, his financer, renames the company Baker Chocolate. Yes, this is Baker's Chocolate, as you know it, the one you get from the store with the little chocolatier lady on it. It was down in Dorchester. They predominantly make drinking chocolate until about 1860. Then they start also doing some bars. 1883, they adopt their famous logo, La Belle Chocolatier. 1896, they are purchased. 1927, purchased again by post. 1966, no more production in Dorchester, moves down to Dover, Delaware. And then in 1989, Kraft purchases it. They are currently the still owner, and they've merged with Heinz. So we still have Baker Chocolate, but being produced by the Kraft Heinz company. I'm going to gloss over some of this real quick. So German chocolate cake, not from Germany. It was actually developed by a man named Samuel German, who worked for the Baker Chocolate Company, and he named it German sweet chocolate. A recipe gets published in a newspaper, and they call it German's chocolate cake. Eventually, the S is dropped, and you just get German chocolate cake from Texas. Has nothing to do with Germany. Few quick items from Baker's here. 2 little cocoa tins, probably 20s or 30s. We're not sure on the date. We own this mold in our shop. This is an old Baker chocolate mold. Obviously, it's in reverse because they're going to fill it with chocolate and then unmold it. And their buildings are still here today, which is pretty awesome. This is where they had their offices. Here are some of the buildings where they produce their chocolates and probably warehouse things as well. This is down in Dorchester. These buildings are still standing. They are now residences. And here you see the Baker Chocolate Company and an artist rendition from probably the late 1800s. And this is the building today. It pretty much looks exactly the same. They've done some restoration, a couple additions on the sides, but it is still here. It is a National Historic Landmark as well. I think that's pretty awesome. There's just a little cocoa tin down there in the bottom too. But I love the artist renditions of these buildings more than the actual buildings, actually. I think those engravings are so great. They also did a play, right? See a little bit of that corporate culture in there. Picture of the first sugar refinery. And again, I do realize I'm going fast. I apologize. I'm happy to share this information though at the end. Just I'll go over my information and I can email the PDFs to you happily. Artist rendition of the Revere Sugar Refinery. We own a box of Revere sugar. It still has the sugar in it. Little crate. Actually, it's a big crate. You can see Jeff's feet there at the bottom of the picture for scale. And this is where they were located. So the Boston Refinery was over here in East Boston, and the Revere Sugar Refinery was over here by Miller's River, which I think is covered up now. And it apparently was in Cambridge. Here is the first candy machine that was ever invented in Boston. Little hand-cranked machine that churns out lozenges. These were the lozenges that would eventually become known as NECCO wafers. I'm gonna go ahead and just pull this whole timeline up. Whoops, sorry. 1847, Oliver Chase invents this little machine, founds Chase and Company. 1901, key date, he merges with two other companies to form the New England Confectionery Company. They are, and they always claim to be, the oldest candy company in the country. We own this bronze sign. We recently acquired it. I'm very happy about that. And it did adorn the corporate headquarters of NECCO right there. I want to think that it was made for the original building in Boston in 1901, but I don't know. I just don't know how old this sign is. It's heavy, solid bronze. A couple other products used to get NECCO wafers in tins, and they made hard candy as well. There's some peach blossoms. This was their original factory in 1901 across Fort Point Channel in Boston. The building is still there. This is what it looks like as of 2018. So you see some similarities. You can see the detail above the windows. The smokestack is still there. And there is a street there called NECCO Way. All right, the decline, what happened? Many things. As you saw, consolidation, a whole lot of consolidation. I've read that by the 1940s, Daggett and NECCO owned all of the other companies in Cambridge. There were basically two, many different factories, but two owners. There was some fraud here and there that led to closures and also consolidations. Climate control, so air conditioning. They could now produce chocolate in the South and in other places. Changes in consumer taste. The decline of the New England sugar industry, which is at least somewhat linked to the rise of Midwestern corn syrup industries. Some of these factories, the kids just didn't want to take it over, so they shut down. We saw this with Russo's very sadly in Watertown recently. Not a chocolate shop, of course, but same situation. Increased international trade. We could get stuff in from Europe that were maybe a little more appealing. And then this was really kind of the big kicker, I think. The rise of the mega producers such as M&M Mars, Hershey, Nestle, Cadbury. Most of these companies, as big as they were largely regional producers. There weren't many international producers or even nationwide producers. So the small artisanal shops, they had that appeal of, we can charge a little more because it's, made there on site and it's really special and you can hang out. The huge producers could produce things so cheaply and so efficiently and so quickly. The ones in the middle just couldn't really compete. And that led to a big part of their decline as well. And we saw similar declines in other cities. Cincinnati and Chicago had really big confectionery manufacturing industries. Largely those are gone. Philadelphia had a lot as well. And to close here, to give you a little peek inside of working confectionery of today that is still located in Cambridge. And it is, of course, our little shop. We go through this real quick. So this was our reopening after being shut down for COVID for a long time. So very different scale than what you saw with Squirrel Nut and Page and Shaw and all that. So it's pouring some caramel, line of buttercups. Gonna go through these real quick. This is our window display for last holiday season. This is inside our shop if you haven't been in before. So most of these pieces I've shown you in the presentation tonight are here in our museum. So this whole back wall, that's where most of our stuff is. We've got things sprinkled all over the place, though. It's a tiny shop, but there is a lot to look at. We are starting to amass an archives in our basement as well, because we just don't have the room to display it all. Little Valentine's display. I'm trying to tempt you guys to eat some chocolate, right? Making some bonbons. We like booze, so we do some whiskey-filled chocolates if you're a whiskey lover. And on the right, we're getting ready for Easter. So some caramel cream, some coconut, and some peanut butter eggs. Little Halloween picture there. Getting ready for Easter, so bunnies and a whole lot of bonbons. And another little collage of Easter products, which is right around the corner. And then sort of last great picture here. This was George Stevens Candy Shop in Broadway and Somerville, to kind of bring it back to Somerville a little bit. I don't know how long this place existed. I think this is probably from the 30s and 40s, judging from what appears to be mobsters there at the bar. This was located where Kelly's Diner now is, in Ball Square. So that is my presentation. I think we did okay on time. Thanks for your patience, guys. I know I went through that quick. There's our information if you are curious to come in and see our little collection. I'm usually there during the week, not always on the weekends. I love chatting about this stuff in person. I can show you some stuff. We have some equipment and molds and all kinds of ephemera in the shop. And if you are curious to learn more about history, here are some books that I recommend. The Baker Chocolate Company book, written by a local author, excellent. He has done a slew of books about Boston history of all kinds, but he really digs into the Baker Chocolate Company, very in depth. It's an easy, nice read, though. It's meant for the consumer. It's not, dense and full of a lot of jargon. Mimi Graney, another local author, she wrote Fluff, the Sticky Sweet Story of an American Icon. Fluff is the focus, but she does look at the industry at large as well. And she also talks, she has some chapters on like the rise of the general store and the dry goods store. These other two books are not about Boston, but they're still about the industry. So Cincinnati Candy and Chicago's Sweet Candy History. And thank you guys very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot. If you grew up in the area, you very likely may have had an aunt or uncle, grandfather, somebody who worked in one of these factories. It was really prominent. So thank you guys very much. And I will hand it back over to Allison if she wants to have any closing thoughts, and I'm happy to answer some questions. And I know that I believe Santiago is as well.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much. This was wonderful. And also big thank you to Jeff and to Santiago. For anybody who hasn't been to the museum, please do come by. It is an amazing show. We also will be doing a number of events in March with Santiago and Jose, the curators and artists, and other chocolatiers. So stay tuned on that. And if you haven't already joined our mailing list, please do that so you can stay up to date on what we're up to. And we thank everybody so much for coming, and to all the participants. We hope everybody has a wonderful night, a wonderfully sweet night. Okay, thank you all so much.